It's 3:14 in the morning and you are staring at the ceiling. Your phone sits face down on the nightstand. You promised yourself you would not check it. You checked it anyway. Now the math starts. 4 hours and 46 minutes until the alarm. Then 4 hours and 31. Then you convince yourself the falling back asleep part doesn't even matter anymore because the damage is already done. Something feels broken, like your body forgot how to do the one thing it is supposed to do without effort. But the real answer is far stranger than a broken brain. For most of human history, waking up in the middle of the night was not a malfunction. It was the plan. Picture a household 400 years ago. No streetlights, no screens, no electricity humming behind the walls. Just a fire burning low and a family settling into bed not long after sunset, because there was nothing else to do once the light was gone. They would sleep, and then, a few hours later, they would wake up, not in a panic, not reaching for a phone that did not exist. They would simply be awake, for an hour, sometimes two. Then they would drift back down into a second sleep, and wake again with the sun. This was not a rare habit. It shows up again and again in the historical record, and one man spent decades proving it. His name is Roger Ekirch, a historian at Virginia Tech. He spent over 15 years combing through diaries, court depositions, medical texts, and works of literature from pre-industrial Europe. And he kept finding the same two phrases over and over. First sleep, second sleep. People described the hour between them casually, the way you might describe your evening routine now. They prayed, they talked with a spouse in the dark, they tended the fire, they visited neighbors, some had sex. Physicians of the era even recommended it as an ideal hour for conception since both partners were rested and calm. This was not just an English habit either. Ekirch traced the same two-part structure into French sources, which called it premier sommeil, and into Italian and Latin texts as well. The hour in between even had its own name. People called it simply the watch, not a symptom, not a disorder, a named, expected part of the night, the same way you might name the part of your evening spent brushing your teeth. Ekirch found references to this pattern in texts from the 15th century all the way through the early 19th. Then, almost overnight, it disappeared. What changed? Light changed. Gas lamps arrived in the cities. Electric light followed close behind. Night stopped being defined by total darkness, and humans stopped going to bed at dusk. Sleep compressed into one long block, squeezed to fit around a day now stretched by artificial light. The 8-hour, unbroken night you have been chasing your whole life is not ancient. It is barely 2 centuries old. That is a striking claim on its own. But a historian finding old diary entries is not proof of biology. Someone needed to test whether darkness alone could recreate this pattern inside a living human body. That someone was Thomas Wehr, a researcher at the National Institute of Mental Health. In the early 1990s, Wehr took a group of volunteers and did something almost nobody experiences anymore. He put them in darkness for 14 hours a night, for a full month. No lamps, no screens, nothing to do once the sun went down except lie there in the dark, the way humans did before a long winter night could be shortened with the flip of a switch. For the first few nights, the volunteers just slept longer. Catching up on exhaustion, most of them did not know they were carrying. But then, something shifted. Their sleep split in two. They would sleep for about 4 hours, wake for 1 or 2 hours of calm, quiet stillness, and then fall into a second 4-hour block. During that middle stretch of wakefulness, their brains were not stressed. Blood tests showed elevated prolactin, the same hormone linked to the relaxed state after meditation. They were not lying there anxious about the time. They were simply resting in wakefulness, the way their ancestors once had. Some volunteers described that middle hour later, after the study ended, and their descriptions sounded almost identical to the old diary entries Ekirch had spent years collecting. Calm, unhurried, a kind of meditative stillness rather than restlessness. Nobody in the lab described it as insomnia, because nothing about it felt like a problem while it was happening. It only became a problem once the lights came back on and modern life resumed. Wehr had recreated Ekirch's 400-year-old diary entries inside a modern sleep lab. Darkness alone was enough to switch the body back into its older rhythm. So the story seems settled. Humans naturally sleep in 2 segments. Modern light stole it from you. Case closed. Except that is not quite what happened next. Because if segmented sleep is truly the ancient, universal human default, it should show up in the one place on Earth where artificial light has barely reached at all. That is exactly what a UCLA researcher named Jerome Siegel decided to check. In 2015, Siegel and his team traveled to 3 remote communities that still live largely as hunter-gatherers, far from any electric grid. The Hadza of Tanzania, the San of Namibia, the Simini of Bolivia. These groups sleep the way humans slept for the overwhelming majority of our species' existence, with firelight and moonlight as their only options after dark. His team strapped sleep-tracking devices onto dozens of volunteers and monitored them for weeks. And the segmented sleep pattern was nowhere to be found. These groups slept in a single, mostly unbroken block, night after night. No first sleep, no second sleep, no hour of quiet wakefulness in the middle. They averaged between 5.5 and 7 hours of sleep, went to bed several hours after sunset rather than immediately at dusk, and woke before sunrise. Their bodies did the exact opposite of what Ekirch's diaries and Ver's lab had predicted. Why would that be? Here is the twist inside the twist. Ekirch's evidence came almost entirely from Europe, in winter, at high latitudes, where nights stretched to 14 or 15 hours of true darkness. Ver recreated exactly those conditions inside his lab. But the Hadza, the San, and the Tsimane live much closer to the equator, where a single night rarely lasts more than 12 hours, and their bodies never face the extended stretch of enforced darkness that seems to trigger the split. So segmented sleep may not be some hardwired ancient instinct buried in every human on Earth. It may be a flexible response, one your biology reaches for only under a very specific condition: long, unbroken, artificial light-free darkness, the kind that mostly disappeared the moment humans invented ways to push back the night. Here is the part that reframes everything a second time. Homo sapiens did not evolve in a place with 15-hour winter nights. The species spent the overwhelming majority of its existence near the equator, in Africa, where day and night stay close to an even split all year round. That means the single consolidated block of sleep Siegel found in the Hadza and the Tsimane may actually sit closer to the deep ancestral default. Segmented sleep, the version Ekirch documented so carefully, may be a newer adaptation, one layered on top of the original pattern, built specifically for the long, dark winters of pre-industrial Europe, and then mistaken for something far older than it actually was. Which means the version of natural human sleep you inherited was never really fixed. It bends to whatever darkness, light, season, and latitude hand it. So when you wake up at 3:14 in the morning, staring at a ceiling lit faintly by a phone charger's standby light, what is actually happening? Your body still carries that old, flexible circuitry. It is still capable of splitting sleep into 2 segments, still capable of settling into a calm, prolactin-soaked stillness in the dark. But it rarely gets the conditions that circuitry was built to run in. No true darkness, no 14-hour night. Instead, streetlight leaking through curtains, a screen's glow an arm's length away, and a mind that has been told again and again that waking at night means something has gone wrong. That belief is the part your ancestors never had to fight. They were not anxious in that gap between first and second sleep because nobody had told them it was a problem. It was simply a room to sit in, warm and unhurried, for an hour, before drifting back down. You do not need candlelight and a spouse whispering beside you to reclaim some of that. But the panic, the phone checking, the mental math about how many hours are left before an alarm goes off, that part is entirely modern. That part is the part actually keeping you awake. Turn the phone over and the screen throws light directly into your eyes. Light your brain reads as a signal to suppress melatonin and delay the very sleep hormone you are desperate to fall back under. Check a sleep tracker on your wrist and it hands you a score, a red bar, a warning, as if the body itself failed a test overnight. None of that existed for the people in Ekirch's diaries. There was no red bar, no score, nothing waiting to tell them their rest had been graded and found lacking. Think about what your ancestors did instead. They did not reach for anything. They did not measure the hour against a deadline. A mother might have nursed a child. A farmer might have checked the coals. A couple might have simply talked, unhurried, in the dark, with nowhere else to be until the sun decided otherwise. The waking itself was never the problem. It was just a second room inside the night, one they had been given permission to sit in. You were never given that permission. You were given a clock, a schedule, and a phone that turns the dark into daylight the second you touch it. So the same biological gap that once felt like rest now feels like failure, not because your body changed, but because everything around it did. There was never one single correct way for a human body to sleep. There was only ever a body responding honestly to the darkness it was given, the latitude it was born into, the season pressing down outside the walls. Somewhere along the way, that honesty got rebranded as a disorder, measured against a single unbroken block of 8 hours that almost nobody, in almost any century, actually managed to hit every single night. Your ancestors did not fear the dark hour in the middle of the night. They used it. And maybe the real question was never why you can't sleep through the night. It's why you ever expected to in the first place.